Aboard the first-class cabin of Aerovista Air, everything gleamed with luxury and polish until a cup of scalding coffee spilled straight down the shoulder of a 13-year-old black boy named Malik Carter. The culprit, none other than Chief Flight Attendant Rebecca Lang, who gave him a cold smile and said, "You must have taken the wrong seat, kid." Not a single passenger spoke up. In that heavy silence of first class, Malik sat there quiet, composed in his worn gray suit. His fingers brushed the edge of a silver bracelet engraved with the letters HC, the emblem of a $3.8 billion aviation investment fund. What no one knew was that, at that very moment, a chain of financial commands had just been triggered and the fate of the entire airline was about to change forever. If it were you humiliated miles above the ground, what would you do? Would you rage cry, or stay silent like Malik, and let the world tremble on its own? Hit like, share, and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear will make you see the sky in a whole new way. Flight AV-207 of Aerovista Air departed New York for Los Angeles on a misty morning. The first-class cabin glowed with sunlight pouring through the windows, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mixed with the expensive perfume of successful travelers. Some passengers opened laptops, others read financial magazines, while a few merely smiled faintly over the breakfast menu. Amid that calm luxury, 13-year-old Malik Carter stepped in quietly. He wore an old gray suit, slightly loose at the shoulders but carefully pressed. It had once belonged to his father, Henry Carter, the chief engineer of the Skylift N9 project, the experimental aircraft that had claimed his life 5 years earlier. Malik lacked the polish of the other passengers. His shoes were scuffed, his demeanor humble. But on his left wrist was a slender silver bracelet engraved with the initials HC. No one in the cabin knew that bracelet was linked to the Carter Aviation Trust, a $3.8 billion investment fund founded by his family to support civilian aviation projects. As Malik placed his small bag in the overhead bin, a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp, cold, and wrapped in professional sweetness. "Excuse me, kid, you're sure you're in the right seat?" It was Rebecca Lang, the first-class chief attendant. She stood tall, chin slightly raised, her gaze sweeping Malik from head to toe. But she wasn't checking a boarding pass, she was judging worth. Malik turned politely. "No, fam. Seat 2A is mine." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. She glanced at his ticket, then back at him. Her lips curved into a faint smirk, a mix of doubt and disdain. A middle-aged man nearby cleared his throat. Another lowered his newspaper, pretending to read. No one spoke up. No one wanted trouble. Rebecca continued her service routine, pouring coffee for passengers. When she reached Malik's row, she paused, tilting the pot ever so slightly. "Careful now. Coffee's hot," she warned. But her wrist turned just enough. A stream of steaming brown liquid cascaded down onto Malik's shoulder. The burn stung sharply against his skin. He flinched, but said nothing. No scream, no protest. The cabin fell silent again. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines, like the heartbeat of the sky itself. Rebecca feigned shock. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry." My hand slipped, but everyone knew it hadn't. She forced a smile, dabbing at his jacket with a napkin, her voice laced with venom. "What a shame. That jacket doesn't quite fit in here." "Does it?" Malik met her eyes and said softly. "That's all right. It wasn't meant to fit in anywhere." He wiped his sleeve calmly, small hands steady and deliberate. Then, unnoticed, he tapped his silver bracelet twice, 2 soft clicks. And a signal went out through satellites, through encrypted financial networks all the way to the Carter Aviation Trust headquarters in Connecticut. Within seconds, A cascade began. Servers lit up. Emergency alerts flashed across the office screens of Avery Carter, Malik's uncle and the fund's executive director. The message was simple. HH27 Protocol initiated. Source Flight AV-207. Avery stopped mid-meeting, his expression turning cold. Freeze all Aero Vista Air holdings. Effective immediately. Back in the sky. Malik sat quietly. No one around him knew that his small gesture had just frozen $820 million, the first wave, in a total shutdown of the $3.8 billion investment chain tied to the airline. Rebecca, oblivious, went on serving passengers. But the air in first class had changed. A subtle tension spread, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Malik opened his small bag and took out a photo of his father, Henry Carter, smiling beside the Skylift N9 on its final test day. No one here knew that Henry had steered that doomed plane away from a populated area, sacrificing his life to save hundreds. Malik studied the photo for a moment, then tucked it away. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Son, sometimes you have to be so silent that people start hearing themselves." Rebecca approached again, this time with a cup of tea. She cleared her throat. "You all right? Sweetheart's sensitive skin shouldn't be near hot coffee." A fake smile, a test, waiting for him to snap. Malik looked up, his voice calm, eyes unflinching. "Thank you. But sometimes, what burns most isn't the coffee." She froze. A flicker of guilt crossed her face, then vanished. An older passenger in 3C, Mr. Donovan, a retired pilot, watched quietly. He recognized that look, the quiet of someone who'd lost much, yet carried no hate. He handed Malik a handkerchief without a word. Just a small gesture, enough to make the boy smile slightly. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds as the plane crossed the Appalachians. Malik rested his fingers on the bracelet again, feeling its cool touch. He knew somewhere below, the system was working. He didn't need to lift another finger. Silence. That was the language of true power. While Rebecca believed she still held control, she didn't know every Aero Vista dollar was now trembling under a freeze order. No shouting, no revenge, just quiet calm, and absolute. Because as his father had said, when a man chooses silence over vengeance, the whole world is forced to listen. There are moments when silence isn't just a reaction, it's a way of speaking to the world. And in that hushed first-class cabin, Malik Carter had chosen his own language. After Rebecca Lang walked away, the boy leaned back against the window. White clouds coiled beneath the silver wings of the Aero Vista jet, twisting like memories through time. The dark coffee stain on his shoulder had dried, but Malik didn't care. He was thinking about the gray suit he wore cloth that carried a promise left unfinished. It had belonged to Henry Carter, his father the chief engineer behind the Skylift N9, the experimental aircraft he'd devoted his life to. On the day of the crash, Henry wore that same suit. When rescuers found his body in the wreckage, a piece of the fabric over his heart still clung to the charred remains of the notebook he'd been writing in. People called Henry Carter the man of the skies, but to Malik, he was simply a father who once led him into the backyard, pointed upward, and asked, "What do you see, son?" Everyone sees clouds, but only a few can see the wind. Back then, Malik hadn't understood. Now, he did. Outside, clouds drifted against the wind, and so was he, moving against the expectations of everyone in that first-class cabin. Rebecca Lang believed he didn't belong here. But the truth was she was serving drinks in a system Henry Carter had helped build. His father had designed the patented jet propulsion system that powered nearly 60% of Aerovista's fleet. After Henry's death, those rights were managed by the Carter Aviation Trust Cat Fund, now led by Malik's uncle, Avery Carter. And Malik Carter was the rightful heir to it all. Yet he had never used that power to boast. No one knew who he was, and he preferred it that way. He had come for something else entirely. 2 weeks before the flight, Malik had made a simple request to his uncle to sit in seat 2A on the next flight to Los Angeles, the very same seat his father had taken on his final test flight. That flight, too, had borne the name Aerovista. That was where the Carter family's tragedy had begun. Malik just wanted to relive a fragment of his father's final moment, not out of grief, but to understand the weight of the legacy left behind. Seat 2A, by the window, where sunlight hit the left shoulder, his father once called it, the seat of balance. Malik rested his hand on the armrest and closed his eyes. He didn't know that, thousands of miles away, inside a glass-walled office in Connecticut, Avery Carter was staring at the glowing code on his monitor. The HH27 Protocol had been triggered. No words were needed. Just one order: freeze all Aerovista investments, audit every process. Avery knew his nephew. Malik wouldn't have done this without good reason, and he understood this boy had inherited more than Henry's wealth. He had inherited his father's way of confronting injustice on the plane. Malik opened an old leather-bound notebook, his father's. The pages were yellowed, filled with technical sketches and equations, but on the last page, in fading ink, was a single line. "Son, if you ever sit in seat 2A, remember not everyone in a uniform can fly, and not everyone who's silent is weak." His hand trembled slightly as he read the words again. The echo of his father's voice filled the still air. Rebecca passed by and glanced at the notebook. She gave a light, mocking laugh. "What are you reading there?" "A textbook." Malik looked up, voice calm and soft. "No, it's a map of the sky. My father drew it." Her smile faded. For the first time, she seemed uneasy. It wasn't the look of a frightened child meeting authority. It was the gaze of someone who had seen enough loss to no longer need to prove himself. From the back row, Mr. Donovan, the retired pilot, watched quietly. He remembered Henry Carter. They'd once attended an aviation ethics conference together in 2007. Back then, Henry had spoken about the morality of flight engineering, and people had laughed at him. But now, seeing Malik, Donovan realized that morality hadn't died. It was sitting right there, in silence, in seat 2A. He murmured under his breath, "True blood never fades." Halfway through the flight, sunlight slanted through the windows, glinting off Malik's faded gray suit. Rebecca passed again, but this time she said nothing. Perhaps she felt it too, that something was shifting, something she could no longer control. Malik straightened his collar. He knew his father had worn this suit with pride, not for its price, but for what it stood for: a path carved by struggle, where a black man had to fight for the right to stand in a lab, sign a blueprint, or sit in a cockpit. He glanced around the cabin faces, calm, confident, unaware, and in that moment, he understood his father's true legacy wasn't in technology or money. It was in integrity, in dignity. He smiled a small, quiet smile. Mr. Donovan noticed, and nodded back. If anyone in that cabin understood what was happening, it was Donovan. He looked at the boy and thought, that child didn't come here to fly. He came to remind us who built the sky. When the intercom announced lunch service, Malik gently closed the notebook and laid it on the tray table. On the final page was a small hand-drawn plane, and beneath it, the words, Sky isn't for the rich. It's for the brave. He read it once more, then gazed out the window. Sunlight glinted off the silver bracelet on his wrist. Somewhere in the digital void, signals were still moving quietly, relentlessly. He didn't need to do anything more. Everything was already in motion, designed, precise, silent, just as his father had built every plane he ever touched. And in that moment, Malik understood legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you protect for those who once believed the sky belonged to everyone brave enough to reach for it. There are reactions that need no words, and there are small actions so subtle they seem meaningless until the whole world begins to move because of them. Sitting quietly in seat 2A, Malik Carter felt the sunlight spill across his shoulder. The sting of hot coffee was gone. Only stillness remained, a calm that seemed to echo his own heartbeat. On his left wrist, the silver bracelet caught the light. He lifted his hand, fingertip brushing the cool metal twice, just enough for a sound softer than a breath. Click, click. That signal traveled through satellites, slicing through clouds before vanishing into the digital space that only those who bore the name Carter could understand. Code HH27. A simple signal, but one created years ago by his father, Henry Carter, long before his death. It wasn't a call for help. It wasn't a command for revenge. It was a system designed to awaken justice in silence. Connecticut Carter Aviation Trust Headquarters. 900 miles away, in New Haven, Connecticut. Rain streaked down the glass of the Carter Aviation Trust building. Inside, Avery Carter, Malik's uncle, stood by the window overlooking the Quinnipiac River. A soft ping echoed through the control room. On the wall-size screen, a red alert appeared. Protocol HH27 activated. Source AV207, Malik C. Avery's brow tightened. He said nothing for a few seconds. The room was so still. The ticking of the clock was the only sound. "It's the boy," he said finally. "He sent the signal." His assistant blinked. "Should I check for a system error?" Sir Avery shook his head. "No. He never does anything without purpose." He turned to the tech team. "Lock down every Aero Vista Air portfolio. Freeze all $3.8 billion for 48 hours. Initiate a full compliance audit." No one questioned him. Everyone knew what HH27 meant, a Carter Internal Emergency Code, used only for violations of ethics or human dignity within the aviation industry. It was a protocol Henry Carter himself had designed after seeing too many cases where numbers buried humanity. Avery took his seat and watched as the financial dashboard filled with names: Skylift Group, Aerovista Air, TechProp Systems. One by one, accounts turned red. The flow of money hardened into ice. Back on flight AV207. Malik didn't know the details, but he knew the wheel had begun to turn. He pulled out a napkin and gently wiped the dried coffee from his jacket, not to erase it, but to keep it neat. He wouldn't let it become a mark of shame, but rather a trace of a lesson learned. Across the aisle, Rebecca Lang still moved between passengers, her smile brittle now. Malik didn't look at her again. He knew those who misuse power eventually have to face their own reflection. A younger flight attendant approached, her voice soft, trembling. "I'm sorry about what happened earlier. I don't agree with the way she treated you." Malik gave a small nod. "Thank you. No anger, no rebuke, just calm and weight in every word." In Connecticut, Aerovista Air's internal system began to flash warnings. Urgent emails flooded executive inboxes. The CEO barked into the phone. Why are all Carter Aviation Trust accounts frozen? What's happening with Cat Fund? No one had an answer, but everyone knew when the Carter Trust moved. The entire industry listened. Avery opened the passenger manifest for Flight AV-207. Passenger name Malik Henry Carter, Seat 2A. He exhaled slowly. Seat 2A. Henry sat there once. A technician asked, "Sir, should we contact him?" Avery shook his head. "No. If he chose silence, we honor it. His actions are already speaking louder than words. Back on the plane." Malik reopened his father's notebook. On the final page was a sketch, an unfinished model of an ethical alert system. Henry once envisioned a mechanism to flag moral breaches in aviation operations. In the corner, a handwritten note read, "When men forget compassion, let technology remind them." Now that system was alive, scanning accounts, executing protocols, rewriting the rules one line of code at a time. Malik took a deep breath. He didn't feel proud or vengeful, only still. He had done what his father taught use intellect to repair what anger would destroy. The old pilot beside him, Mr. Donovan, leaned slightly toward him. "Son, you seem to understand how the world works better than most of us." Malik smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the clouds. "No, sir. I just know that sometimes the right thing doesn't need to be loud." Donovan studied him, then nodded with a gentle smile. "Just like your father." As Flight AV-207 glided over the skies of Kentucky, Malik felt something deep inside, a sense of balance returning to the world. Justice, not through outrage, but through quiet precision. He knew Avery would understand, and he knew that once the Carter Trust moved, the entire aviation world would have to face itself. But Malik hadn't done it for vengeance. He'd done it for Henry Carter, the man who believed morality could be written into machines, and for every child who would one day sit in Seat 2A, free from scalding coffee or prejudice. Sunlight gleamed off his bracelet. Inside the band, barely visible, were engraved words, HH27 for justice, not for pride. Malik brushed his thumb over the letters and whispered, "Did I do the right thing, Dad?" And in the steady hum of the engines, it was as if the sky itself whispered back, "Yes, son. You made the world listen through silence." As thick clouds began to swirl around the airplane's wings, Malik Carter closed his eyes. Below lay the rolling spine of the Appalachians, mountains stretching like waves beneath the sky. It was the same stretch of air his father Henry Carter had flown through on the final test flight of his life. The steady hum of the engines blended with the slow rhythm of Malik's 13-year-old heartbeat. He wasn't afraid, only still. Ever since he'd tapped the HH27 code, something inside him had opened a door long locked, and the memories came flooding in like water through a broken dam. He remembered that morning, the day Henry left home. There was fog on the porch, and his mother, Elna Carter, buttoned Henry's coat with trembling hands. Malik, only 8 years old, stood at the doorway and asked, "Daddy, are you flying higher today?" Henry knelt, smiling gently. "A little higher, son. But it doesn't matter how high you fly. What matters is how many people you lift with you." That was the last time Malik ever saw his father. The test flight had been meant to make history. Project Skylift N9. A next-generation aircraft built by Henry's team was supposed to be a triumph of American aviation, efficient, powerful, and fully human-engineered. But 27 minutes after takeoff, everything went wrong. A navigation system failure sent the plane hurtling toward a residential area in the Appalachian foothills. In the cockpit's final seconds, before the signal went dark, Henry Carter steered the aircraft away from the town and into the forest, staying at the controls until the explosion. When investigators recovered the black box, they heard only his final words: "Keep the skies safe. Never forget we fly for people, not for profit." The company issued a brief statement afterward, calling him a hero, and then they moved on, announcing restructuring plans and shifting projects as if nothing had happened. But in the small house in Connecticut, no press release could soften the silence that followed. Helena Carter had once been vibrant and full of laughter. After the crash, she seemed to fade day by day. Malik remembered nights when she'd sit in front of the television, tuned to the Weather Channel, staring blankly at the radar screen as if waiting for his father's voice to return through the static. She never cried. She just listened to something far away. 3 years later, she died in her sleep. Heart failure, they said. But Malik knew it was grief that stopped her heart. At the funeral, he stood beside her grave in his father's gray suit, rain pouring down. His uncle Avery Carter, Henry's younger brother, placed an arm around his shoulders and whispered, "From now on, you'll live with me. But remember this, Malik, you are not an orphan. You carry the name of the man who built the sky. Learn to use your mind to keep it clean." Life changed after that. Avery wasn't a warm man. He was quiet, sharp, always in motion meetings, reports, endless calls. But every night, he sat with Malik in the wood-paneled library of the Carter Aviation Trust headquarters. He taught him how to read engine schematics, how money flowed between airlines, and most importantly, how power was nothing without restraint. "You see, Malik," Avery once said, his voice low, "one keystroke can shake an entire industry, but never use it in anger. True strength is knowing how to hold it back." From those long nights, the HH27 system was born, a protocol Henry had once drafted, refined by Avery, and later entrusted to Malik alone. Each time the code was triggered, it audited every company the Carter Fund invested in its finances, conduct, and ethics. No judge, no jury, just data and integrity. And today, sitting in seat 2A, Malik had invoked it, not to avenge spilled coffee, but to defend the very principle his father had died for, that human dignity must always stand above corporate profit. He remembered his years with Avery, the house filled with the whir of printers, the glow of screens reflected in his uncle's stern face. There were nights Malik would wake and find Avery still working, eyes locked on data. Yet every morning, the man was up early, quietly making his nephew a cup of hot cocoa. "You know, Malik," he once said, "we can't save the whole world, but we can save the way the world treats people." Those words had stayed with him through boarding school, through every glance of doubt and prejudice. He came to understand that his father's legacy wasn't wealth or fame. It was responsibility. Oh, now, on this flight, as the endless blue stretched beyond the clouds, Malik could almost feel his father beside him. In his mind, Henry sat once more in seat 2A, smiling gently. "You did well, son. Not because you fought back, but because you stayed calm." Malik opened his eyes. The Appalachians sprawled below, peaceful, green, eternal. The wind brushed the wings, whispering secrets through the metal. He drew a long breath, his fingers resting on the silver bracelet. In that moment, he was no longer the boy who'd been humiliated in first class. He was the heir to a promise, the one continuing Henry Carter's dream, a sky that belongs not to the powerful or the privileged, but to everyone brave enough to rise. Outside, the sky remained perfectly blue calm, untouched, as if nothing had happened. Flight AV-207 continued to glide smoothly through ribbons of white cloud, and no one in the first-class cabin realized that, somewhere far below, bank accounts were freezing. Numbers on trading screens were turning from green to red. But in seat 2A, Malik Carter sat still, eyes fixed on the window, as though he were simply admiring the clouds. At 13, he understood something most adults never did sometimes. Silence echoes louder than any shout. He remembered the day his father Henry Carter had his research stolen. Malik could still see it, the quiet betrayal, the faces around the conference table pretending not to notice. Henry didn't argue. He didn't slam his fist. He just smiled faintly, gathered his papers, and told his son, "You don't have to shout to prove you're right. If what you're doing is just, the world will speak for you." Back then, Malik hadn't understood, but now, as the dried coffee stain clung to his shoulder, he understood completely. Whoa! Rebecca Lang, the flight attendant who had spilled that coffee, began to sense something was wrong. The air in first class felt different, too quiet, almost eerie. Passengers were whispering, glancing her way, then toward the boy in seat 2A. She felt their stares like pressure on her skin. Forcing a smile, she approached Malik. "Young man, I'm truly sorry about earlier. My hand slipped. I didn't mean to." Malik closed his father's old leather notebook, looked up, and replied softly, "That's all right. Burns cool down eventually." The words hit her harder than any accusation. She had expected anger, maybe tears, but the boy's stillness, his absolute calm, was far more unsettling, and that silence frightened her. "Halpo." Across the aisle, Mr. Donovan, the retired pilot, watched closely. He'd flown for over 30 years, met arrogant captains, humble ones, guilty ones, but he had never seen eyes like this child's calm, clear, older than his age. He sighed, turning to the man beside him. "That boy doesn't need to raise his voice. One look from him, and people know they've gone wrong." Beneath the clouds, the HH27 signal was already racing through servers. The Carter Aviation Trust Cat Fund algorithms were scanning terabytes of data, financial records, internal communications, HR logs. Hundreds of emails began firing off to airlines, banks, and federal oversight boards. An industry-wide ethics audit was now in motion. Malik knew exactly what was happening, every protocol, every sequence of code his uncle Avery Carter had once explained to him. HH27 wasn't designed for revenge. It was built to protect the integrity of the skies, to remind every company that respect is the first rule of flight. He could still hear Avery's voice. True power. "Malik, isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them think." And now, somewhere between heaven and earth, that truth was unfolding. Rebecca tried to regain her composure. She reached for a spare jacket to offer Malik, but her hands were trembling. A tray slipped. Cups crashed. A passenger helped her pick them up. No one spoke, but everyone could feel the shift. Something unseen was happening, something larger than the cabin itself. Malik remained quiet. Sunlight poured across the wing outside, and for a moment He imagined his father's silhouette there smiling, steady, waving from the open sky. Malik smiled back, silent, but powerful. At that same moment, in the Carter Aviation Control Room, monitors flashed one after another. HH27 signal confirmed. Freezing Aero Vista Air portfolio. Initiating compliance audit conduct. Personnel, internal systems. Avery Carter typed a final command. Prioritize ethical review. Any evidence of discrimination or bias report directly to the FAA and DOJ. He paused, staring out the window at the gray Connecticut skyline, his face a mix of sorrow and pride. The boy made the right choice. He whispered, Don't. Back in the sky, Malik turned the silver bracelet on his wrist. There was no anger in him, no vengeance, only a deep sadness. The kind born from watching people repeat the arrogance his father had died, trying to end the arrogance of those who forget that every life is equal at 30,000 feet. The younger flight attendant, the one who'd brought him water earlier, returned and said softly, I really admire your calm. You know, I don't understand what's happening, but something about you makes me ashamed for her. Malik gave a gentle smile. You don't have to be. Some lessons the sky teaches on its own. An hour later, as the captain announced their descent into California, Rebecca Lang didn't dare look toward Seat 2A again. Every time her eyes flicked that way, she saw her own reflection in his calm gaze, not a professional uniform, but a human being standing before a mirror called justice. The boy hadn't yelled. He hadn't filmed her. He hadn't demanded anything. Yet she knew what she'd done would not disappear. Not because someone reported her, but because that boy had woken her conscience. As Flight AV-207 crossed the California coast and golden light filled the cabin, Malik leaned his head against the window and whispered, Dad, I didn't say a word, but the world will hear. And far below, the numbers began to tremble for real. The setting sun laid golden threads across the clouds that evening. Malik Carter sat motionless in Seat 2O, eyes half closed, looking for all the world like a boy dozing off after a long day. But inside the thin shell of the silver bracelet on his wrist, an entire global network had begun to stir. From the instant HH27 was triggered, encrypted signals shot out of the Carter Aviation Trust servers in Connecticut, racing across a dozen time zones, sweeping through banks, investment funds, and aviation conglomerates. Within minutes, every transaction tied to Aero Vista Air froze. Monitors flashed red. In the Dallas Operations Center, a technician cried out, This can't be right. We just lost $820 million in 10 minutes. Across the Atlantic, investment desks in London received a red-coded alert Carter Fund freeze detected. That single phrase was enough to rattle entire trading floors. No one knew why the Carter Fund had moved so suddenly, but everyone understood what it meant. If they acted, something serious had happened, something that violated the founding principle of Henry Carter himself. Technology can fail. Morality cannot. The cabin atmosphere shifted. The Wi-Fi system blinked out without warning. In the cockpit, the captain's console lit up with a high-priority directive from Federal Air Control Protocol, HH27 initiated. Confirm onboard conditions. Captain Rowan glanced at his first officer. That's not a standard alert. It's a Carter Trust code. The co-pilot frowned. Carter Trust. You mean? Henry Carter. Rowan nodded. He had flown with Henry years ago, during the first Skylift trials. He still remembered that easy smile. Yes. And if that code's active, whoever triggered it isn't ordinary. Switching to a secure FOA channel. Rowan heard the voice from the ground. Flight AV-207, we confirm activation from Seat 2A. Ensure the passenger's safety and maintain cabin conditions until further notice. Rowan's eyes flicked down the aisle, and there he was, the boy in the worn gray suit. Henry's eyes. Henry's quiet strength. The captain took a slow breath. He understood now the legacy was alive. Down on the ground, Avery Carter stood at the center of the control room, surrounded by lawyers, analysts, and engineers. On the screens, financial graphs bled from green to red. All AeroVista holdings and affiliates are frozen. One manager reported. Avery's expression barely changed. How much exposure? Roughly $820 million. Sir, but secondary banks are halting another $2 billion pending review. He nodded slowly. Good. Forward every compliance report to the FAA and the Senate Finance Committee. This isn't an investment issue anymore. It's a test of the entire industry. A young analyst hesitated. Mr. Carter, should we issue a public statement? The media's already calling. Avery looked up at the pulsing words, HH27 active, on the display. His reply was calm, deliberate. No. Let the world ask why. Sometimes silence is a statement. Back on the plane. Captain Rowan stepped into first class. He stopped beside Seat 2A. Young man, I'm Captain Rowan. I believe I knew your father. Malik opened his eyes and gave a small nod. Yeah, sir, I think you did. They regarded each other, one carrying the past, one carrying its future. You sent the HH27 signal, didn't you? I didn't send it to punish anyone, Malik said quietly. I sent it so the system would remember what my father taught it. Rowan's throat tightened. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. You did right. Some lessons can only be heard when the world is forced to be quiet. In a glass tower overlooking the Pacific, chaos reigned. CEO Martin Greaves slammed his hand on the table. What the hell's going on? Why did Carter freeze our capital? The legal director's voice trembled. Sir, it appears the HH27 signal was activated from Flight AV-207 by a passenger named Malik Carter. The room went dead silent. Carter, Martin muttered, as in Henry Carter's son. No one answered. No one needed to. If that was true, this wasn't a glitch. This was a declaration, a reminder that the Carter family still held the moral gravity of the skies. Martin leaned back, beads of sweat forming on his brow. He'd met Henry once, years ago. The man's warning echoed in his head. Never let arrogance fly the plane in place of the pilot. Now that warning had come home to roost. Up in the air. Malik stayed quiet, hand resting on his bracelet. The other passengers stole uneasy glances, curious, cautious, awed. Only Mr. Donovan truly understood. He watched the boy and thought, sometimes the sky needs a child to remind grown men how to be human. On the FOA radar, a new message appeared. AeroVista Air Compliance Review initiated. Subject passenger Malik Henry Carter. Beside it, the Carter Trust emblem pulsed a single bright star on a dark field. It was no longer a financial signal. It was a moral one, a quiet reminder that in a world full of noise, sometimes all it takes is one boy sitting still for the entire sky. To listen. As the jet pressed westward, the sunlight softened into honeyed amber, spilling across first class like the last whisper of day. No one spoke, yet everyone could feel it, an unseen shift in the air, heavy and still, as if something irreversible had just taken place. Captain Rowan had returned to the cockpit. Malik Carter remained in seat 2A, small hands resting atop his father's worn leather notebook. The dying light caught the edge of his silver bracelet, turning it into a band of cold fire. No one fully understood what had happened. but everyone sensed it. This boy was no longer the child who didn't belong in first class. Rebecca Lang, once so sure of herself, could no longer stand still. The same aisle she'd walked with confidence now felt like a stage lit by judgment. Passengers averted their eyes not in pity, not in curiosity, but in quiet reflection. When the cabin screen flashed, "Network connection lost," her pulse spiked. She didn't know why, but fear crept in the kind that starts in the chest and spreads outward. She walked toward seat 2A, voice trembling. Are you okay?" Malik looked up, calm as ever. His gaze held no anger, no resentment, only stillness. The kind of stillness that forces you to face yourself. "You don't need to worry about me," he said softly. "This suit tells a better story." The words struck like a quiet chord. Rebecca glanced at the faded gray fabric, the dark stain now dried on his shoulder. Suddenly, she remembered that morning admiring her own crisp uniform in the mirror, believing it gave her the right to look down on others. But now, standing before this boy in an old suit, she realized he carried more dignity than everyone on this flight combined. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I really didn't know." Malik interrupted gently. "You did. You just thought no one would remember." Her breath caught. He was right. It hadn't been an accident. It was habit, a reflex built on years of quiet arrogance, of assuming uniforms defined worth. The cockpit door opened. Captain Rowan stepped out, composed but firm. "Miss Lang," he said evenly, "please return to service. We're under special protocol. Stay in position until further notice." Rebecca nodded quickly, eyes down, but before leaving, she turned once more. Who are you?" she whispered, almost like a confession. Malik didn't answer. He simply touched the silver bracelet on his wrist. A faint light flickered across it, and in that instant, she knew. She didn't need anyone to explain. She had just insulted the son of Henry Carter, the man aviation once called the keeper of the clean sky. A chill ran through her body. Her knees nearly buckled. Rowan leaned close to the boy. "We've received confirmation from the FAA," he said quietly. "The Carter Trust has frozen all Aerovista investments. You know what that means, don't you?" Malik nodded. "I do. I didn't do it to destroy them. I just wanted them to stop and look." The captain's lips curved into a faint smile, proud and sorrowful all at once. "Your father would be proud of you, son." Malik's gaze turned toward the window, where the sky burned crimson. "He told me once that justice doesn't need a gun, just someone calm enough not to pull the trigger." The cabin fell silent again. A few passengers sensed that something extraordinary had unfolded, though none could name it. Phones stayed down. The Wi-Fi was dead. No one wanted to record this moment because, somehow, it felt sacred. Rebecca lingered by the galley, staring at the floor. Words failed her. All she could do was retreat each step heavier than the last, not from fear of losing her job, but from the sudden, unbearable fear of meeting her own reflection. The cabin lights dimmed to twilight blue. Captain Rowan returned to the cockpit. Malik opened his father's notebook and wrote, in small, even letters, "Silence isn't weakness. It's how conscience learns to hear itself." From a few rows back, "Mr. Donovan leaned forward, his deep voice low and kind. "Son, if your father were here, he'd smile knowing you kept your dignity." Malik shook his head gently, eyes on the violet sky. "No, sir. He'd just say I kept my calm." To him, calm was dignity. Donovan nodded slowly. "Then the world needs more men like him and more boys like you." in Los Angeles, Martin Greaves, CEO of Aerovista, faced a wall of glowing monitors. Every one of them flashed red alerts. FAA just contacted us, a legal advisor said breathlessly. There's a passenger named Carter on flight AV207. They're demanding full personnel data within 2 hours. Martin slammed his pen on the table, his face pale. A child has just brought a 20,000-employee company to a halt. A board member corrected him softly. Not a child, sir. A Carter. Martin stared at the screen. HH27, active pulsed like a heartbeat steady, unstoppable. He could hear Henry Carter's voice from long ago. Never let arrogance fly the plane instead of the pilot. Now. That warning had returned with the weight of consequence. High above, Malik leaned back, feeling the hum of the engines beneath him. Outside, the sunset bled into darkness. A cool draft brushed his cheek through the cabin vents. Inside him, everything was quiet, not triumph, not vengeance, just a deep, steady peace. He knew that justice had begun to move not through power or anger, but through the smallest act of all, a boy choosing wisdom over wrath. Outside the window, dusk had deepened into velvet night. The first stars shimmered faintly, their light glinting off the wing like quiet silver fire. In the hush of first class, only the low drone of the engines remained steady, rhythmic, and alive. To Malik Carter, every vibration of the fuselage felt like a pulse, a whisper destiny, shifting its weight. After a brief radio exchange, Captain Rowan stepped out once more. He scanned the dim cabin, eyes settling on the boy beneath the soft amber light. Leaning to his first officer, he murmured, "Let him in. I need to speak with him. Alone." A few passengers turned curiously. At the rear, Rebecca Lang froze mid-motion. Her heart stung with fear and awe because she knew this moment, however small, could decide not just her career, but the fate of Aerovista Air itself. Malik rose slowly, every step measured and soundless, yet each one pressed the cabin deeper into silence. When the cockpit door closed behind him, the world outside dissolved, leaving only the soft glow of instruments and the faint hum of electric air. Captain Rowan swiveled in his chair. He had flown thousands of hours, met countless souls, yet never had he felt so humbled by the calm gaze of a 13-year-old. "You're Malik Carter, aren't you?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," came the boy's steady reply. The first officer glanced uneasily at the display. OH-27, active, pulsed in amber on the panel. He cleared his throat. "Captain, FAA just confirmed. Carter Trust has frozen all Aerovista Holdings' $820 million, and climbing." The hum of the engines was the only sound that followed. Rowan looked back at the boy. "You just froze nearly $1 billion. Son, do you understand what that means? In this business, that's called escalation. You could bring a corporation to its knees." Malik met his gaze without flinching. "No, sir, I didn't escalate anything. I just fulfilled a responsibility." "Responsibility?" Rowan echoed. Malik nodded. "I didn't trigger HH27 to punish anyone. My father once said, 'Technology can lift you into the sky, but only ethics can keep you there.' Someone forgot that today. If I stayed silent, I'd be forgetting him too." For a long moment, Rowan said nothing. In those calm, unblinking eyes, he saw Henry Carter again, his old colleague, the man who'd refused to abandon the cockpit so others could live. He remembered the funeral, the gray sky, the way people hailed Henry as a hero and then forgot him. Now here stood his son, small yet steady, carrying a legacy heavier than most men could bear. "You're right, Malik," Rowan said at last. his voice rough. "Your father taught me something once. If you want the sky's respect, start by respecting everyone on the plane. I guess some of us let others forget. Then today," Malik smiled faintly, "we remind them." The young first officer sat down, hesitant but moved. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "You're standing against the whole system." Malik turned toward the window, where the stars stretched endlessly across the dark. "I'm not standing against anyone. I just sent a signal so the system can see itself." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Your father believed that too. He used to say, 'No one can fix the sky if they never look up.'" Malik touched the silver band on his wrist. "I just want to keep his sky a little cleaner." No one spoke after that. In the blue glow of the dashboard, the three sat in silence, a ghost, a guardian, and a boy, bound by the same quiet faith that had once defined aviation. Rowan picked up the radio handset. "This is Captain Rowan. Flight AV-207. We confirm an ethical breach involving passenger Malik Carter. FAA will receive a full report. Transparency on all accounts." The voice from ground control replied, "Confirmed. Captain, FAA and Carter Trust will coordinate review. Keep the passenger safe." When the call ended, Rowan turned to Malik. "You've made them listen to what your father tried to teach all his life. But remember, justice isn't always fast. Sometimes it takes the long way around." Malik's gaze softened. "I know. My father took the long way, too. He turned the plane around instead of ejecting. I haven't forgotten." The first officer bowed his head. Henry Carter, the man who left his blood in the cockpit so others could live. For a while, none of them moved. Only the hum of the engines filled the air, like the heartbeat of something greater. Then Rowan smiled gently. "Malik, would you like to take the controls? Just a touch. Your father always said the sky should be guided only by those who respect it." Malik hesitated, then placed his hand on the co-pilot yoke. For one breathless instant, everything stilled: the stars, the engines, the world. He could almost feel his father's hand layered over his own. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "Now I understand why he loved this place." Rowan nodded. "Because up here, everyone is equal. It's only hearts that make us different." The jet skimmed through a veil of pale clouds, moonlight spilling across the glass, and Malik's eyes caught the reflection of 1,000 tiny stars, bright but never blinding. When he stepped back into the cabin, passengers looked up but said nothing. Rebecca Lang, standing by the service counter, bowed her head as he passed. Malik didn't speak. He simply nodded a gesture, not of forgiveness, but of grace, the kind that invites redemption. Back in seat 2A, he opened his father's journal and wrote a single line in the sky. "Justice doesn't fly fast, but it always lands where it belongs." Night had fully claimed the sky as Flight AV-207 began its descent. Below, the lights of Los Angeles spread out like a golden net shimmering against the dark sea. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. Only the steady hum of the engines and the faint whir of the landing gear broke the silence. Malik Carter closed his father's worn leather notebook. Since returning from the cockpit, he'd been quieter, yet something in his eyes had changed deeper, steadier, as if he'd just crossed a threshold that takes most adults a lifetime to reach. He knew it wasn't over. The real storm waited on the ground. Captain Rowan's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into LAX. Thank you for remaining calm throughout the flight." But no one clapped. No one moved. Every gaze drifted toward seat 2A, where the boy with the silver bracelet sat perfectly still, fingers interlaced, expression unreadable. When the wheels touched the runway with a soft jolt, Malik looked out the window. He remembered his father's words. Every flight, long or short, has two defining moments, takeoff and landing. What matters most is who you remain in between. And tonight, he had remained, not through strength, but through silence. As the plane rolled to a stop at gate C-12, the air in the cabin shifted. The door opened and 3 men in dark suits stepped aboard. One of them was Avery Carter, Malik's uncle. Beside him stood a representative from the Federal Aviation Administration and Martin Greaves, the CEO of Aerovista Air. Rebecca Lang froze. Her fingers clutched the edge of a seat until her knuckles went white. Avery moved calmly down the aisle, his gaze finding his nephew. He didn't speak, just gave a single nod. Malik understood. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. You did the right thing. Ladies and gentlemen, Avery announced, his voice calm but commanding. I'm Avery Carter, Director of the Carter Aviation Trust. We need to speak privately with a few individuals from this flight. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Rebecca lowered her head. Martin Greaves swallowed hard, trying to hold his composure as sweat beaded at his temples. The FAA official stepped forward. A serious ethical protocol designation, HH27, was triggered mid-flight. We're here to record statements from all involved parties. Rebecca's knees nearly gave out. When two security officers approached, one asked quietly, Rebecca Lang. Her voice barely escaped. Yes, that's me. Malik remained seated. No one told him to move. Yet everyone watched him, the calm center of a gathering storm. Avery turned to Martin Greaves. Mr. Greaves, I suggest full cooperation with the FAA. The Carter Trust has frozen over $800 million in Aerovista investments. We'll be reviewing your company's hiring, training, and passenger care policies in their entirety. Martin's face drained of color. Mr. Carter? This must be some misunderstanding. The boy Avery's tone cut clean through the air. The boy your company dismissed as not belonging in first class is the reason your entire system is being forced to look in the mirror tonight. Greaves had no reply. Then, from the back, a raspy voice rose. Mr. Donovan, the retired pilot, stood. Mr. Carter, I was here when it happened. That boy didn't do a thing wrong. He just sat there and let the truth reveal itself. A murmur swept the cabin, passengers nodding, some raising phones to record. The silver bracelet on Malik's wrist caught the light, glimmering like a quiet heartbeat. Avery turned to him. Malik, would you like to say something? The boy stood, adjusted his collar, and spoke softly. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write a word. I just sat still, and the system showed its own reflection. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Then someone whispered from the back. That's power. Real power. A passenger lifted a phone and began recording. The clip lasted only 12 seconds, a composed black boy standing in first class, speaking with disarming calm. No music, no edits, no commentary. Yet within an hour of landing, the video went viral with a headline, The Boy Who Said Nothing and Made an Entire Airline Bow Its Head. Millions watched. Hundreds of thousands commented. Across every feed, messages appeared. Dignity doesn't shout. A child reminded the world what adults forgot. Henry Carter's legacy still flies. At the airport, Rebecca Lang was escorted to a quiet room for questioning. She didn't cry at first, just stared at her trembling hands that had once held silver trays with confidence. An FAA investigator asked if she wished to make a statement. Her voice was barely a whisper. I never thought a single drop of coffee could make the whole world see who I really am. But maybe it was time. Then, finally, she wept. Outside, Malik and Avery stepped onto the tarmac. The Los Angeles night carried a salty breeze and the distant thunder of departing jets. Avery placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, silent. Malik looked up at the sky, the same sky his father once flew, the same one he had just forced an entire industry to face. A reporter hurried over. Malik, do you have anything to say to the public? He turned toward the stars. Only this, my father always said. When you fly, you carry the stories of hundreds on the ground. I just wanted to make sure none of them are forgotten. The next morning, front pages everywhere carried the same headline, The Boy in Seat 2A. One network wrote, He didn't shout, he didn't retaliate, but the whole world listened. Within 24 hours, the FAA launched a full-scale industry investigation. Aerovista Air issued a public apology and suspended multiple executives. And Malik Carter, the quiet boy who only wanted to sit in peace and remember his father, became a symbol of awakening across aviation. A reminder that no matter how high humanity flies, the most vital thing it can carry is dignity. The news of the boy in seat 2A spread faster than the speed of sound. By morning, every major newspaper carried the same image: Malik Carter, calm-eyed and faintly smiling, standing on the LAX tarmac under the nightlights. Beneath it, a single headline read, The boy said nothing and made the world listen. TV networks replayed the 12-second clip from the first-class cabin. Malik's quiet voice, steady and clear. I didn't post a video. I didn't call anyone. I just sat still, and the system revealed itself. Millions watched it again and again, not for the drama, but for what it mirrored back. This wasn't just a child who'd been wronged. It was a reflection of how society still quietly assigns seats to people it deems less worthy. 3 days later, in Washington, D.C., they held a renewed memorial for Henry Carter, the engineer who had given his life to save a small town from an aviation disaster, a name nearly forgotten, now remembered because his son had reminded the world why integrity mattered. Hundreds filled the hall: reporters, officials, veterans of the sky. On stage, beside Henry's portrait, sat a single display seat, Gue, the very same model Malik had occupied on flight AV-207. Malik walked to the podium without notes, a silver bracelet on his wrist, a photo of his father in hand. The hall fell completely silent. Even the camera shutters waited. My father, Malik began softly, his voice clear but edged with emotion, wasn't famous. He had no fortune, no power, but he lived by one simple rule. Human beings fly on wings of respect, not engines. He paused, scanning the room. Last week, someone asked why I didn't get angry when I was insulted. I thought about that. Then I remembered my father's eyes in the cockpit the day he knew the plane would go down. He wasn't angry. He was calm, because anger saves no one, but calm can save hundreds. Cameras clicked, but Malik's voice stayed measured, storytelling from somewhere deep and quiet. That day on flight AV-207, someone told me I was in the wrong seat. But no one sits in the wrong place when they know where they belong. My father once sat in seat 2A. I sat there to remember him, to remember that kindness never requires a first-class ticket. In the front rows, several people lowered their heads, eyes shining. We should never need power to be treated as human. Malik continued, Respect shouldn't be a reward for status. It's the beginning of every conversation. The hall was utterly still. Even those who'd come out of curiosity now leaned forward, breathing carefully. Malik looked up at his father's portrait. His next words rang through the hall like a bell. My father taught me, dignity isn't earned, it's born. The sentence rippled through the crowd like current. People rose to their feet slowly at first, then all at once applause building into a wave that wouldn't stop. A retired pilot whispered to his colleague through tears, "That boy, he just spoke for all of us." When the clapping faded, Malik added quietly, "That day, I didn't want anyone fired. I didn't want anyone shamed. I just wanted the sky my father loved to stay clean. And if one child can make people look at how they treat each other, maybe there's still hope for us all." He bowed his head. For a moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath, and those watching on live television felt something rare. Not outrage, not spectacle, but awakening. That night, every network carried the same headline, "The Boy in Seat 2A, When Silence Became Strength." Over 50 million views in 2 days. Commentators analyzed every phrase, every glance. But what moved people most wasn't his words. It was his stillness, the quiet strength his father had once called the altitude of the heart. "When you can hold your center," Henry Carter had said, "the world will have to stop and find its balance too." From the audience, Avery Carter smiled faintly. No press release, no statement the Carter Trust didn't need one. Malik had already spoken for them, and more than that, for the entire industry. When the ceremony ended, Malik lingered beside the display of Seat 2A. He traced the scratches along the armrest identical to those on the chair his father had once occupied. "Dad," he whispered, "I didn't shout. I didn't win anything. I just kept what you taught me, fly with dignity." He looked across the hall and saw Rebecca Lang standing quietly in the corner, eyes filled with remorse. When their gazes met, she gave a small nod. Malik returned it. No words, no absolution, only understanding. And maybe the beginning of change. As he stepped outside, people lined both sides of the walkway. No cheers, no chants, just a gentle, continuous applause. An elderly woman took his hand and whispered, "Son, you reminded us that silence can heal too." Malik smiled. Above Washington, the night sky was cloudless, the stars burning bright as silver. He looked up and murmured once more for himself, for his father, for the sky. Dignity isn't earned, it's born. After the ceremony in Washington, D.C., when the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly dispersed, Malik Carter remained standing. He gazed up at the photo of his father, the gentle smile, the steady eyes, watching over him from somewhere beyond the clouds. In that quiet moment, Malik understood his journey wasn't over. The truth had only begun to surface, and now the world would have to look at itself. Honestly. 3 days later, the FAA officially launched a nationwide investigation into commercial aviation ethics, the first of its kind in nearly 20 years. The press release was blunt. The incident involving passenger Malik Carter on Flight AV-207 has exposed serious deficiencies in ethical and passenger equality protocols across multiple major airlines. The name Aero Vista Air dominated every headline. Reporters camped outside its headquarters day and night. Questions came hard and fast. Who allowed this to happen? Why did a child have to teach adults about dignity? Executives, HR heads, even board members were suspended indefinitely. Financial regulators froze additional funding streams for Aero Vista. Everywhere, from airport lounges to coffee shops, people were talking about the boy who made an entire industry stop by saying nothing in a small town in Missouri, as March winds blew cold. Rebecca Lang, the former chief flight attendant of Flight AV-207, packed up her modest apartment. No Navy uniform, now just a faded sweater, worn jeans, and a suitcase layered with travel stickers. Tokyo, Paris, Chicago, Dubai, a lifetime of miles, now condensed into one bag. The morning news replayed Malik's speech. No one should need power to be treated like a human being. Rebecca froze. Every word landed like a pinprick to the heart. She remembered that moment on the flight, her own sharp words, his silent gaze. No hatred in it, only calm, and that calm made her feel unbearably small. Now, in the stillness of her empty room, even the wind seemed to whisper that same silence she had once failed to understand. Later, at a roadside diner, she met her old friend Karen, another former flight attendant. "Where will you go now?" Karen asked softly. Rebecca sighed. "Home. Back to my mother's. I think it's time I learn how to live like a human again." Karen said nothing, just squeezed her shoulder. Rebecca's eyes drifted out the window. That moment on the plane when I looked into that boy's eyes, I realized I was the one sitting in the wrong seat. Not him. Back in Washington, Avery Carter met with FAA officials and the Carter Aviation Trust CAT Fund. Together, they drafted a sweeping set of reforms, independent audits, a human dignity in the sky training program, and an anonymous ethics reporting system for airline employees. Avery spoke firmly in the closed meeting. No one should ever see a 13-year-old carry the moral weight meant for grown adults. But maybe it took his innocence to wake the rest of us up. An FAA official nodded. "Mr. Carter, that boy accomplished what we couldn't in years. He made an entire industry look in the mirror." Malik didn't go straight home. He and Avery visited the Carter Institute of Aeronautics, where his father once taught. Blueprints of aircraft still hung on the walls. A test bench still bore the marks of Henry Carter's soldering iron. Avery placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Your father believed justice didn't need to shout. You've proven him right." Malik said nothing. He looked up at the model of the N-7, the plane his father had flown on his final mission. "Touching the wing," he whispered. "I didn't let your flight be in vain." Meanwhile, in Missouri, Rebecca started a new job at a community center, teaching communication skills to local youth, an ironic role for someone who once forgot how to listen. During one class, a young black girl raised her hand. "Miss Lang, you used to be a flight attendant." "Right. Do you regret what happened?" Rebecca paused, eyes soft. "Regret doesn't change much, but awakening can. I just hope I never forget again. Every passenger, no matter the seat, carries a story." She glanced outside. The sky was clear, a thin white jet trail crossing it like a thread of forgiveness. Rebecca smiled faintly. She wasn't afraid to look up anymore. A month later, the FAA released preliminary findings. Aerovista Air was fined $250 million for training and management failures, but more importantly, a new ethical framework. The Carter Standard was adopted industry-wide, funded by the CAT Trust. An FAO spokesperson declared the boy in Seat 2A didn't just trigger an investigation. He reignited humanity in the skies. That evening, in Connecticut, Malik sat by the window overlooking snow-covered hills. He opened his leather journal and wrote, "Justice isn't when someone gets punished. Justice is when people realize they can be better." Closing the book, he looked out at the blinking lights of planes fading into the night sky. He no longer felt like the lost boy on that flight. Now, he was something else, a quiet compass guiding a world that had almost forgotten its true direction. As winter melted away in Connecticut, The ice around the headquarters of the Carter Aviation Trust began to thaw, revealing warm earth beneath. The world outside went on as usual. Planes took off. Deals were signed. Airports bustled yet inside the aviation industry. Something deeper had begun to move. A quiet, irreversible wave of change had taken flight. Following the FAA investigation, not only Aerovista Air but dozens of major airlines launched emergency reviews of their ethical and training systems. Reporters called it the Carter effect, a phrase now used to describe the ripple that began with the silent act of a 13-year-old boy on Flight AV-207. Malik Carter vanished from the public eye. He went back to school, lived like any other teenager, but what he had started could no longer be stopped. In the first weeks after the investigation, Avery Carter Malik's uncle stood before the press to announce the Carter Standard, named in honor of his late brother, Henry Carter. He didn't make a long speech. He simply rested a hand on a slim folder and said, "My brother believed technology can lift people into the sky, but only ethics can bring them safely back to Earth. The Carter Standard exists to remind us of that truth." The new code of ethics was built on 3 pillars. 1. Bias and dignity training. Every airline employee, from cabin crew to senior executives, must complete immersive scenario training that exposes how unconscious bias can strip away basic humanity. 2. Anonymous reporting system. Both passengers and employees can send feedback or report misconduct directly to an independent ethics board, without fear of retaliation. 3. 90-day ethical audits. Independent evaluators assess each airline's service behavior every quarter, from passenger interaction to crisis response. Within 3 months, over a dozen airlines across the U.S. and Europe signed on. One newspaper headline summed it up. For the first time, an industry overhaul was sparked by a 13-year-old boy. A former Aerovista training director later admitted, "We used to treat ethics as a formality. After the Carter case, we realized one careless word, one condescending glance can cost more than $100 million. Aviation academies introduced a new module, Ethics in the Sky. In every classroom, the image of young Malik Carter calm in his gray suit became a symbol of grace and composure. Not because he was heir to a billion-dollar trust, but because he had chosen wisdom over anger." In Missouri, Rebecca Lang, once the flight attendant at the center of it all, took on a new role. She was invited to serve as a training consultant for the Carter Standard, leading a segment called Understanding and Healing Personal Bias. On her first day, her hands trembled as she faced the screen, the same video of herself from Flight AV-207. Instead of looking away, she faced it head-on. "That woman in the video, that's me," she said to the class. And she didn't understand that one drop of coffee can leave a lifetime scar. I'm not here to excuse her. I'm here to prove that change is possible. A young Indian-American trainee burst into tears. "I've been treated that way before, and I don't want anyone else to feel it." Rebecca stepped forward and took her hand. Her voice cracked, but was firm. And that's exactly why the Carter Standard exists. International media called it the awakening of the skies. From the U.S., the movement spread to Canada, Germany, Japan, and South Africa. Several global airlines placed small brass plaques in every first-class cabin engraved with the words, "Dignity takes no seat number." A year later, FAA reports showed a 62% drop in discrimination and passenger misconduct complaints, the sharpest decline in aviation history. But what made Avery Carter proudest wasn't the statistics. It was the letters, handwritten messages arriving at the Trust's office from all over the world. One came from a mechanic in Texas. "I've worked at Aerovista for 17 years. After hearing Malik's story, I realized how long I've stayed silent when seeing wrong things happen. Yesterday, I spoke up for the first time and I wasn't fired. Tell that boy thank you. On a warm June afternoon, Malik and his uncle visited the newly opened Henry Carter Human Dignity Center. The steel gate gleamed with the inscription, "Where every passenger matters." A group of young trainees approached, asking for photos. Malik smiled gently. "Don't remember my face. Remember this sometimes. Sitting still is enough to move the world." Avery looked at his nephew, pride shining through his quiet demeanor. "You know, Malik, the stories that were once buried in airport lounges are being told again. People are finally realizing the sky doesn't just need engineering, it needs a heart." That evening, Malik sat on the porch as the sun dipped low over the Connecticut hills. He opened his notebook and wrote, "If a small act can start a chain reaction, let it begin with respect." Outside, the sky blazed orange and gold. A plane traced a white line across the horizon, thin as a brushstroke, endless as hope. Malik looked up and smiled. He knew now his father, Henry Carter, was still flying. Not just in memory, but in every ethical code. Every steady pair of hands that carried others through the sky with dignity. By midsummer, warm winds carrying the scent of dry grass swept over the Connecticut hills, where Malik Carter spent most of his time reading in the small garden behind his home. He had learned how to return to ordinary life, but the world around him would never be ordinary again. The Carter Standard had grown far beyond aviation. Its influence spread into education, healthcare, and even politics. People everywhere began to speak of dignity not as an abstract virtue, but as a guiding light for a society struggling to remember its soul. On quiet afternoons, Malik often sat on the worn wooden steps, flipping through his father's old journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words still burned bright. In the corner of one page, his father had written, "A system is only as strong as its will to protect the weakest." That line stayed with him. He realized his story couldn't end with news articles or viral videos. It had to continue not for revenge, but to ensure that no other child would be treated the way he once was. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. It was a letter from the U.S. Transportation Ethics Committee inviting Malik to testify before Congress. The note read, "We want to hear directly from the young man who reminded the world what respect truly means." Malik, now 14, taller but still calm beyond his years, read it quietly and said, "I don't know what they expect to hear. I can only tell them what my father believed." His Uncle Avery smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what they need to hear. Malik, the truth is always simple." The morning of the hearing, the Capitol building gleamed beneath the July sun. Reporters crowded the steps. Cameras flashed. Inside, the committee chamber overflowed with lawmakers, journalists, and citizens. At the center of it all stood a boy in a gray suit, a silver bracelet shining faintly on his wrist. When the chairwoman invited Malik to speak, the room fell utterly silent. He opened his father's leather notebook, glanced at the faded writing, then looked up. His voice was soft, but clear enough to reach every corner of the hall. "If I hadn't carried the name Carter that day," he said, "I might have just been another kid forgotten with a burn on his shoulder." A stillness swept the chamber. No anger in his tone, only truth, quiet and heavy. My father, Henry Carter, was an aerospace engineer. He gave his life to save hundreds when a flight system failed. My mother died soon after, and I grew up with my Uncle Avery, who taught me that true power doesn't come from wealth, but from how we treat people. But on that flight, Someone forgot that lesson. She spilled coffee on me and told me I didn't belong. What hurt wasn't the burn, it was that she believed she was right. Several members lowered their eyes. An elderly congresswoman, once a flight attendant in the 1970s, wiped away tears. Malik held up the notebook. "My father wrote this," he said steadily. "When the system in the sky fails, make sure the one on the ground doesn't." He looked around the chamber. "We can fix wings. We can replace engines. But we can't fly safely if our hearts still carry prejudice. Because when contempt becomes normal, justice falls." Applause erupted, then stopped just as suddenly, as if no one wanted to break the gravity of the moment. Light from the window glinted on Malik's silver bracelet, the initials H.C. catching the sun. He spoke once more. Softly, now my father told me. "Malik, don't make the world bow to you. Make it lift its head and see each other as human. I'm not here to demand justice for myself. I'm here to ask, can we learn to fly without leaving anyone behind?" When he finished, the entire room rose to its feet. No chants, no slogans, just quiet understanding. The next day, every major network replayed the testimony. One headline called it, "The Moment America Stopped to Listen." An editorial wrote, "That boy didn't just speak about aviation, he spoke to the soul of America itself, reminding us how to see one another again." Clips of his line spread across the internet. When the system in the sky fails, make sure the one on the ground doesn't. Viewers commented, "That's not a quote. That's a blueprint for fixing the world." Weeks later, Malik received a handwritten note from the president. "Son, you weren't just a passenger on that flight. You became a navigator for an entire nation." Malik never showed the letter to anyone. He folded it neatly, tucked it into his father's journal, and placed it in the drawer beside his bed. That night, standing at his window as another plane crossed the stars, he whispered, "Dad." I said what needed to be said. The rest is up to them. And indeed, it was. The Carter Standard soon evolved into the Human Dignity Act, a sweeping national law setting ethical benchmarks for all public service and transportation industries. In schools, Malik's words appeared on bulletin boards and classroom walls. No one should need power to be treated like a human being. At the Carter Training Institute, Rebecca Lang, now an ethics instructor, began each new course the same way once. I was the one who spilled the coffee. Today, I teach others how to pour respect. A year later, Malik stood on stage at the Humanitarian Youth Awards. When the host asked how he felt, he simply smiled. "I don't think I'm a hero. I just did what my father always did, kept the skies a little safer, by starting with the human heart." The audience rose in thunderous applause. Among them, Avery Carter wiped his eyes quietly. He knew that in that moment, his nephew was no longer the boy in seat 2A. He had become something greater, a guide for an entire generation, reminding the world that true flight doesn't begin with wings, but with dignity. When summer came, warm winds carrying the scent of dry grass swept over the Connecticut hills, where Malik Carter spent most afternoons reading in the small garden behind his house. He'd learned how to return to an ordinary life, but the world around him would never be ordinary again. The Carter Standard hadn't just changed aviation, it spilled into other fields: education, healthcare, even politics. People started talking about dignity like a new guiding light for a society losing its faith in itself. On long, quiet evenings, Malik sat on the old wooden steps and reopened his father's notebook. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, yet every line still felt alive. In the upper right corner, His father had once written, "A system is only strong if it knows how to protect the weakest." That sentence stayed with Malik. He realized his story shouldn't end with headlines or viral clips. It had to continue not to punish anyone, but to make sure no other kid would ever be treated the way he once was. And then, the invitation from Washington arrived. On a July morning, Malik and his uncle Avery Carter received a letter from the U.S. Transportation Ethics Committee, inviting him to testify before Congress. It read, "We want to hear from you the young man who reminded the world of the value of respect." The 13-year-old boy was 14 now taller, but with the same uncanny calm in his eyes. When he heard the news, he simply said, "I don't know what they want to hear. I can only tell them what my father believed." Avery set a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what they need. Malik." Truth is always simple. On the day of the hearing, the Capitol glittered in the sun. Cameras crowded the steps. Inside, the committee room was packed faces that had shaped aviation policies, civil rights, public programs, and in the middle of them all stood a teenager in a gray suit, a silver bracelet on his wrist. When the chair called on Malik, the room went still. He opened the leather notebook, glanced at his father's handwriting, then lifted his head. His voice was soft, but carried clean to the back row. If that day I hadn't carried the name Carter, I might have been just another kid forgotten with a burn on his shoulder. The chamber held its breath. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a truth that hurt to hear. Malik went on, unwavering. "My father, Henry Carter, was an aerospace engineer. He gave his life to save hundreds when a test system failed. After that, my mother died from grief, and I grew up with my Uncle Avery, who taught me that real power isn't money. It's how we treat people. But on that flight, someone forgot. She poured coffee on me and told me I didn't belong. What hurt wasn't the burn, it was that she believed she was right." A few lawmakers lowered their heads. An elderly congresswoman, once a flight attendant in the 1970s, quietly wiped a tear. Malik raised the notebook. "My father wrote this. When the system in the sky fails, make sure the system on the ground doesn't." He looked around the room. "We can fix a wing. We can swap an engine. But we will never fly safely if our hearts still carry prejudice. Because when contempt becomes normal, justice falls." Applause broke out, then softened to silence. Malik glanced down at his hands. Window light flashed across the HC engraved on his bracelet. He continued, gently. "My father told me, Malik, don't try to make the world bow to you. Make it lift its head and see each other as human. I'm not here to demand justice for myself. I'm here to ask, can we learn to fly without leaving anyone behind?" The room rose. No slogans, no theatrics, just a chorus of nods that said, "We understand." Later, national TV ran the speech in full. Networks called it the moment that made America pause. One paper wrote, "A child didn't just speak about aviation. He spoke to America's soul, where everyone is relearning how to see one another with respect." Millions rewound the line. When the system in the sky fails, make sure the system on the ground doesn't. Comments poured in. This isn't a quote. It's a map for fixing the world. Weeks later, a handwritten note arrived from the president's son. "You weren't just a passenger on that flight. You became a navigator for this country." Malik didn't show anyone. He folded the letter, slipped it into his father's notebook, and put it back in the bedside drawer. That night, watching a plane cross the dark sky, he whispered, "Dad, I've said what needed saying. The rest is up to them." And it was. The Carter standard widened into the Human Dignity Act, a new law setting ethical baselines across transportation and service industries. In schools, his words showed up on bulletin boards. No one should need power to be treated like a human being. Rebecca Lang, now an aviation ethics trainer, told each new class, "Once, I was the person who spilled the coffee. Today, I teach people how to pour respect." A year later, Malik stood on stage for the Humanitarian Youth Award. Asked how he felt. He smiled. "I don't think I'm a hero. I just did what my father did, kept the sky a little safer by starting with the human heart." The room stood and clapped without end. In the crowd, Avery Carter dabbed his eyes. From that moment on, his nephew was no longer the boy in seat 2A. He had become a guide not just for aviation, but for a generation. 1 year after the hearing that hushed America, Malik Carter's name still surfaced not in sensational headlines, but in quiet stories about compassion and awakening. Yet what meant the most wasn't praise or prizes. It was the moment he and Avery stood before the glass doors of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The sky was clear. A light breeze carried the scent of jet fuel and the memory of pilots past. In the central gallery, beneath warm amber lights, sat something simple that made everyone stop seat 2A. Not a gilded first-class throne, the very seat Malik had taken on AV 207, where everything began. A small brass plaque read, "This seat was once occupied by someone who sat still and made the world move." Malik stood quietly. He didn't touch the seat. He just looked. In the soft light, it felt like his father Henry Carter was sitting there too, smiling gently, nodding as if to say, "Well done." Avery whispered, "See it. Malik, your father flew to save lives. You taught the sky how to treat people again. 2 different journeys, 1 purpose." Malik smiled, barely above a breath. "I never wanted to shake the world, Uncle. I just wanted it to learn how to listen." Beside the seat, an interactive display looped Malik's line from Congress. "If I hadn't carried the name Carter, I might have been just another kid forgotten with a burn on his shoulder." Visitors stopped and watched in silence. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes and told her grandson, "See, that boy taught grown-ups how to treat each other." Meanwhile, in Seattle, Rebecca Lang walked on stage at an international workplace equity conference, not the sharp-eyed attendant from years ago, but a diversity and fairness trainer for the Carter Foundation. Behind her, a title filled the screen, "Seat 2A, the lesson that changed my life." Her voice trembled, but rang honest. "Back then, I thought I was serving an airline. I forgot I was serving human beings. It took 1 wrong cup of coffee and 1 silent boy to remind me." She told the story plainly. No excuses. Every sentence peeled back a layer of weight. When she finished, the room stood not out of pity, but because awakening begins when someone faces their own fault. A reporter asked, "Do you think Malik forgave you?" Rebecca looked up at the rain-soft Seattle sky. "I don't know. He never said. Maybe forgiveness isn't to let someone else sleep at night. It's to learn how to live right." Months later, a documentary premiered at Sundance Seat 2A, The Boy Who Changed the Sky. No A-list actors, no action sequences, just real footage, photographs, voices, Malik's wind-soft narration over piano. One scene stilled the theater, Malik saying, "When she poured coffee on my shoulder, I wanted to cry, but I remembered my father." You don't always have to answer with words. Sometimes you just let the world hear your silence. The film ended on seat 2A. Light washed through an aircraft window, flaring across a brass plate. He sat still and made the world move. When the house lights rose, no one clapped at first. They just sat there, a few heads bowed, hiding tears. Then, like a tide, the theater stood. The applause was not for a boy, but for a generation choosing dignity over reaction. The film won Best Documentary that year. At the presser, the director said, "This isn't a film about airplanes. It's about what keeps people flying." On premiere night, Malik wasn't in Hollywood. He was at school, in a tech room building wooden aircraft models with friends. When a teacher burst in holding a paper Seat 2A wins big at Sundance, the class cheered. Malik just grinned. That seat has flown far enough. It's time we build new seats where anyone who sits is treated the same. The teacher wrote it on the whiteboard. It became the class motto. That evening, Malik turned on the TV. The national broadcast showed people lining up to see Seat 2A. A white 8-year-old girl looking into the camera said, "I want to be a flight attendant, but I'll never make anyone feel sad." Malik chuckled softly and switched off the screen. He stared at the night sky. A plane winked its lights across the dark, sketching a soft arc of silver. He didn't know where that flight was headed, but he believed the sky felt safer, now kinder, more trustworthy. He wrote the year's last entry in his journal. Legacy isn't money or fame. It's when one act of kindness makes other people want to live kinder. The next spring, Washington's sky was clearest in memory. White clouds drifted slowly. Sunlight spilled over the glass of the National Air and Space Museum, where Seat 2A lay like an ageless witness. But Malik didn't go to the museum that morning. He was at Reagan National, standing at a gate, holding a ticket, stamped Seat 2A. Exactly 1 year since the world met the boy in the gray suit. 1 year since a speech that moved America, a Sundance ovation, and a moment when he chose silence over anger. Time had passed, but something in him needed to return to where it all began. He told no press, no cameras, no lights, just a 14-year-old in his father's worn vest, with a silver bracelet dulled by time. He wanted to sit in the same place not to relive the pain, but to see how far he'd come. Stepping into first class, he hesitated. Seat 2A was there by the window, the light laying its soft stripe across the cushion. On the side table sat a small metal placard, reserved for Malik Carter. No one knew who arranged it, but he did. The airline had kept that seat as a reminder. The biggest changes often start with the smallest acts. Malik sat, set his hand on the cool armrest, and felt the sky's familiar breath. It was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. A moment later, a flight attendant spoke gently. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter. I don't know if you remember my sister, Laura. She was crew that year. She teaches at Jefferson now, and they still share your story with the kids. My little brother says whenever someone's being picked on," the teacher asked, "if Malik Carter were here, what do you think he'd do?" Malik looked up and smiled. "Thank you. Maybe he'd choose to sit still." She nodded, eyes warm, and that's why people listen. As the plane lifted, the city shrank to threads, the roads weaving like memory lines. He thought of his father's rule of flight. Every journey needs balance. Science keeps a plane aloft. Humanity keeps people from falling. Light flickered across the silver bracelet. Malik tapped it twice, an old habit from the HH27 days. This time, no signal went anywhere. It was just a reminder that silence can be the deepest connection of all. He opened his father's notebook, the one he carried every time he flew. On the first page, he wrote, The sky remembers everything. He paused, thinking. Maybe the sky remembers more than perfect flights and tragedies. Maybe it keeps the glances, the kind words, the moments when someone chooses mercy over reaction, at cruise. Captain Rowan, the same man who'd met Malik in the cockpit a year before, stepped out to say hello. He sat across from him with a soft grin. "You again?" "Seat 2A, yes, sir. And this time, I'm just a regular passenger." Rowan chuckled. "No, kid, you've never been regular. You changed how we fly, not just with our hands, but with how we see each other." Malik looked back at the clouds. "I only did what my father taught. Flying high doesn't mean forgetting how to land with your heart." Rowan nodded, hand to Malik's shoulder. "Since then, we added a cockpit rule no one takes off while holding a prejudice. We call it the Carter Rule." Malik laughed. "Not sure whether to be proud or worried if my name's a rule." Rowan stood. "Think of it as a reminder. Some flights cross more than sky. They cross our conscience." When the plane touched down, the cabin applauded an old habit. But it sounded different this time. Not relief. Gratitude for the sky and for each other. Malik walked off slowly. At the door, a boy of about 8 clutched a copy of Seat 2A. The boy who changed the sky. He looked up, shy. "Are you the boy from the book?" Malik smiled and knelt. "I used to be. Now it's your turn to write the next part." The child nodded, eyes bright. That night at home, Malik wrote the final line of this journey. "The sky is safer not because the wings got better, but because people learned to see one another with a kinder heart. Maybe that's how we truly fly." He closed the notebook and set it beside his parents' photo. Outside, a thin new moon hung over the rooftops, laying silver across a distant wing. A soft breeze moved through the open window, carrying the sky's quiet sound, the sound of peace. Malik sat still, closed his eyes, and smiled. And in that stillness, you could believe this much: the boy in Seat 2A made the world move simply by choosing to sit still. The story of Malik Carter isn't just an airline scandal or a twist of power. It's a quiet reminder that human dignity doesn't come from status, skin color, or wealth, but from how we respond when faced with injustice. Malik was humiliated, shamed in front of the world, mid-air, and yet, instead of anger, he chose silence. He let the truth speak for itself. And that calm, deliberate silence made the whole world stop and look at how it treats one another. In life, we can't always control how people treat us, but we can always choose how to react. Choose calm over rage. Choose dignity over revenge. Because intelligent silence isn't weakness. It's the strength of someone who knows who they are and doesn't need to shout to prove it. Malik's story teaches us that a single act of respect can shift an entire system. And maybe, just maybe, if each of us learned to see one another with empathy, this vast world would start to feel a little closer, a little kinder, and a lot safer. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you believe that kindness and wisdom can still make the world better, like, share, and subscribe. Because here, we tell the stories where justice begins with the heart.